Hello, everybody. It is another Saturday or Sunday night, sorry, and it means we're here with another great indie comics creator to go over a really cool book. So I'm going to welcome in Dave Swartz to talk about Confederate Monster. Dave, how's it going?
Oh, pretty good. How about you, Benjamin?
Doing great, doing great. I'm having a little bit of a connection issue. Oh, there we are. It happened all at once. Great. So there's Confederate Monster on screen here. Dave, it's great to have you back on the show. Why don't we just start off with giving us a quick pitch on what is the story of Confederate Monster?
Sure. So, Confederate Monster, in a nutshell, is a cowboy version of Frankenstein set during the Civil War. So, the story basically takes place 8 years after the original monster was reanimated. So, a lot of these characters that we know, like Dr. Frankenstein and Igor, they have grown and evolved. So, our main character, though, is Igor, and he's sort of been hiding out in Virginia, posing as this doctor, just trying to kind of live a normal life. And then the Confederacy finds out about his secret past, and they kidnap him and convince him to reanimate their dead army. So it's a lot of gory, historical horror fun.
Very cool. So this campaign is live on Kickstarter now. It's got 24 days to go. It's pretty close to its goal. So I'm, almost certain you're gonna get this book. It's gonna get backed and produced, which is great. By the way, the link for this book and a few other books is right down in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can scroll right down, click on the link, get over to Kickstarter, and back this great book. So Dave, this is campaign that includes your previous issues, but this is for issue 5 of the story. How big is the story going to be overall?
Right. So overall, it's going to be 6 issues. So we only really have one more issue after this to wrap things up, at least for this first arc. I've been asked a couple of times in the last few weeks about where I want to take it, if I have plans for this universe post issue 6. And yeah, I kind of want to explore different quote unquote like universal monsters within this Confederate monster universe. I think it'd be kind of interesting to kind of bounce around different parts of the country and see what else is going on out there. So yeah, I'm seeing where it could go beyond 6, but for right now, this first sort of contained story that features the Frankenstein characters, just these 6 issues. So one more to go.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, there's some stories I've done that I've ended in a way that I'm like, I'm not sure I'm going to do another one, and then I kind of just have it in my head, and a good idea eventually pops in, and I run with it. But for this, I mean, it's impossible not to just have a million ideas on where this could go, especially if you're talking maybe bringing in the Mummy or Dracula or any of the other great guys. That just would be. I mean, I could even think you could really get into the nuts and bolts of like campaigns in the Civil War, and if they're in certain parts of the world or the country, that it would just lend themselves. I mean, that it just a million really, I think, appealing directions that could take us. So,
well, we kind awesome of like, right. Well, and one of the things I wanted to just sort of dovetail off of that concept is, in the story we sort of very subtly allude at the fact that very much like the Nazis were trying to sort of look at supernatural things as methods of power for them. I think it'd be similar that the Confederacy was doing something similar. So maybe they had a group that were tasked with investigating all of these ghost stories or supernatural type creatures of myth. So maybe they have to somehow go out there and build a little investigative group that's going to see if this is real or not. So who knows what they found? Who knows what files are out there? I don't know. So yeah, it's a fun way of expanding the whole universe.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, there's just like a million cool things that could happen there, and it does kind of. While it does sound like wild to just say, oh, Frankenstein, but in the Civil War, you do think about what you just said, where, at this time in history, like countries did that. People thought of that stuff. It was not like utterly crazy to think that something like that might have been thought of or happened.
Right.
So I'm a big Civil War buff. I mean, I've watched that documentary a million times, and I love also like a lot of historical fiction and stuff that kind of gets into alt history.
Mhm.
Do you really get into kind of do you really try and follow the history as much as you can and interject this one thing, or is it just kind of a backdrop? I mean, I think both could be really cool, but how much do you play with that, like the actual history of campaigns and different historical figures, or and then how did you kind of decide when to do that and when not to?
Sure, it's a good question. I think it's largely more of a backdrop than it is. We're going to feature very specific historical, events. However, I would say that there are a lot of actual historical characters that are lifted from history and used in the story. Two of them being Confederate generals that are utilized as like more my main villains, my avatar villains.
Hmm.
So Bedford Forrest and Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson's riding that undead horse right there.
Hmm.
So kind of my thought was that um, Bedford Forrest was sort of the sort of sidekick to Stonewall Jackson, and Stonewall Jackson was killed. So Bedford Forrest sort of continued his work to develop these, horrific, sort of ways of bringing back their soldiers to life. And that's actually born out of the real fact that part of the reason why the South lost the war was because they didn't have the manpower. They had plenty of weapons and
Hmm.
supplies, but they just didn't have the manpower. So I thought, well, wow, that really kind of plays into my whole concept that they really needed their soldiers back from the dead. So yeah, I think that some of it is historical and fairly accurate and keeps to that, and then some of it I obviously play around with. I push the technology forward a little bit. I sort of assume that Victor is not just a brilliant biologist, but he's just a brilliant mind. So I think
Hmm.
he would be able to develop his own, electrical, system and lights and all kinds of different things that you may not necessarily have seen during the Civil War. But I chalk it up to Victor's brilliance.
Well, it makes sense, and I mean, I think what you say is really it's not just like a sort of Abraham Lincoln versus zombies thing, which is I had fun too when that was kind of a fad. But you look at a lot of things. Even the Civil War was like the war was just really changing. Then there were so many times, like the beginning of the war, all the generals were like, "We can't just like send dudes into machine gun fire. That's horrific." It was they were kind of seeing new horrors that they hadn't really ever imagined before. If you
Right.
put zombies into that mix, it's kind of I don't know if thematically it's I mean obviously it's not the same, but you imagine people being in that environment, just seeing things that you'd never imagine happening that are terrible beyond imagination,
Right.
and then zombies all of a sudden it actually doesn't seem that weird, and I don't know that it would change the dynamics of things in a huge way aside from just logistical. Okay, this guy's back, and it's obviously a boon to the Confederacy against the Union and stuff like that. So
Right.
I mean, I think it really plays with the history, especially of that particular conflict, really well.
Thank you. Yeah, well, in that time period too, in my research, I discovered that the Civil War era was the time when battlefield amputations were done for the first time. So, just the whole concept of people around you having their limbs chopped off, is just adding to the horrific nature of like
Yeah.
the whole scene and like what that the symbolism of all that means, for the story. So I leaned into that pretty heavily. I think in the battle scene so far, the last one I just did for issue 5, where the horde of undead Confederates just sort of lay rampage across this Union platoon,
Mhm.
and it's pretty gruesome. Just tons of real intense war, and I'm gonna just be doing more of that. Because we're ramping up into this big conflict between the two sides, and we're kind of introducing a lot of opportunity for me to really do some pretty big, expansive, sort of battle scenes.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm super excited about that, and just super excited to kind of get to this part of the climax. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, so without spoiling it, I mean, this just sounds like such an engaging story with like a really irresistible concept at its core. Like I said, without spoiling, kind of what shape is the plot taken so far in terms of our main heroes and villains, and kind of what are we barreling towards as we get? This is the penultimate issue. The next one's going to be, I think you said a two-parter. So we're kind of getting to the end here. Kind of tell us a little bit about like specifically where we're at and kind of what's just over the horizon for the presumably big finale.
All right, I'll try to truncate it as much as I can without giving way too much. So, like I was saying before, our main character Igor, or as he is known in the book, Dr. Daniel Schmidt. So I call him Daniel. So Daniel has been captured by the Confederacy. He is forced to recreate the process, but in doing so, he discovers that he is unable to. He doesn't know the secret. But the Confederacy reveals that they actually have Victor. The only problem is Victor is insane because he's been in an insane asylum for 8 years. And so they figure out a way of getting Victor's mind back. And that's something that I think you should probably read the issue to really see because it's important. But then, Victor and Igor sort of work together in order to recreate the process by reviving the bride in the book, which again, I would prefer that you read the book in order to figure out more about the backstory of the bride. But the bride is really, important to the story as well. It's a very kind of different version of the bride. But then, we're at the point now where our heroes are on the run. They meet up with the original monster. So he kind of saves them and, reveals himself. He's sort of just been watching Victor this entire time, kind of like keeping watch to make sure he did not, get out and do any of this mad scientist stuff ever again. So they all kind of meet up and they're on their way to the White House in issue 5, trying to warn the Union and President Lincoln about this, army of undead soldiers that are just laying waste and unstoppable and, coming for him. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, I'd say.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean that's just such a great, I think a great way of weaving that in. Just with the concept, I think it would certainly be enough if you just had even Igor doing something for one side of the conflict to really like change the dynamic of the war, and that be a little bit of an alt history adventure thing. But I mean, obviously, in the back of your mind, you'd be thinking like, where is Frankenstein's monster? He's got to be bouncing around somewhere with an eye on this. Where are they going to bring the Bride of Frankenstein? All that.
Right.
I don't know if I instantly think when's he going to fight the Mummy or the Wolfman or anything like that. But
well, there were a couple people asking, are they going to show up? And I was like, not yet, but so.
But yeah, it's cool how you're playing with that stuff because obviously, it comes to mind. It's like, oh yeah, it's I can't wait till he gets to Abbott and Costello or who else he's going to fight.
That's why I keep saying Frankenstein meets a Civil War because I want people to put that together. So.
Yeah, I love that. So last time you were on, I think I spent half the time just praising your art, which is beautiful, really great stuff. Remind me, are you coloring this as well?
I'm doing everything.
Okay.
So I'm doing not only the illustration, but the coloring, the lettering, the graphic design, the marketing, the promotion, the social media, everything. So
one of those, yeah, that's what I do too, man. It's a lot to take on. So
yeah,
hats off.
You know what it's like.
Yeah, no, I just get I can do one thing really well at a time. So I get in a good mode with drawing, and I'm moving along pretty well on that. But my social media just goes off a cliff.
Oh, man,
and likewise, right, the other way around. If I'm doing good in the social media, it's like, dude, I gotta get some pages knocked out.
Yeah, I feel that.
So it's really challenging. I love especially this panel here, the colors are fantastic. I really like that.
I did a sort of like a psychedelic overlay. So I painted everything, natural colors first. And then I took a layer of just regular, flat color. And I sort of just spread out a couple of different rows of psychedelic, sort of stuff. And I sort of blended it and made it all look weird. And then I just put a blending mode. I think it was maybe overlay. It might have been soft light or something. I don't know. I put a different blending mode on it and just dropped the opacity so that like all the colors sort of, mixed together. So you get a little bit of that hint of the natural color that's supposed to be there, but then it mixes with this weird psychedelic color to give you this weird ombre effect. So yeah, it was fun. I love doing these trippy ones. I have a couple scenes in the book where we use magic mushrooms to help the monster and the bride to reconnect their neural pathways.
Oh, wow.
To kind of help them because I would imagine that when they're brought back to life, that they might be alive, but their brain is sort of like reset to animal instinct, so that they don't have like their personality, they don't have like the regular neural connections that they once did because those are gone. So like in my research too, I found out that magic mushrooms are known as a neural connector. So they're like literally designed to like go in and reconnect neural pathways. So I thought, well, hell, that's a pretty interesting pathway, because who doesn't like some like psychedelic horror, So I thought, why not? Because it would at least make for some very cool like visuals.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. And obviously, I guess this is what Bent Box Comics. Good to see you guys. Thanks for commenting and watching the show. They also do some great books.
Yeah.
Mentioned that the psychedelics implementation was a thing that was really cool, which it is a great idea. I think I've seen people either writing or articles or something I've listened to while I'm working, saying that they've been doing research lately on like psychedelics really kind of doing what you described, helping people get over things, kind of fix some stuff mentally. So that seems like a really good way to fold that in, I would say. It's a lot of research for a comic about Frankenstein, going back, ending up in the Civil War. But I mean, I think that's the way to go. I mean, you really do have to. I research so much stuff from my books, even if they're really don't need that. I think it's just great fun to have something. You'll end up with something I think is a little more tactile and makes sense when you're thinking things through to the degree that you're thinking this through. And I think it works really well. So you mentioned some overlays and stuff. I'm assuming you're coloring this in Photoshop then.
Yeah. Okay.
Largely. Yeah, I was gonna say I really love not just we were kind of going over the colors and stuff and what you've done here, but just the little bit of texture you have on these looks really great. It's kind of a paper texture with some roughness there.
Yeah,
looks fantastic.
Thanks. It's just like a bit of a yellowed aged paper. It has a nice grit to it. But it also has a bit of an ombre to it, so like the very edges of it are a little more red than they are towards the middle. It's also got some little imperfections throughout. Not noticeable in every section of the page, but I think it's enough in there just to kind of give the right mood. I do I'm a professional illustrator, by day. That's like my main gig. And so I work on a lot of different books from time to time. And I like to think that I approach the coloring, especially, I mean, I do for the drawing too, but the coloring, especially, a sense of like, what does the story really need? And trying to build a color scheme and like an overall approach to it that like will work for the story. Like I'm doing a book right now with, a guy, Sean Wood, who his book is called Retconning the Little One. It's also on Kickstarter. And so he's doing this book that's it's like a robot and a little girl, and the robot's trying to save the little girl from zombies. I know I'm doing a lot of zombie stuff. Anyway, so that book is it's got blood and guts and gore and that kind of stuff, but it also has this little quality about it because one of the main characters is like this little girl. So I wanted to make it still light, almost like Wall-E like, but if Wall-E was like battling zombies. So like it does have a little bit of that grit to it, a little bit of that blood, but at the same time, like the colors that I use are very kind of bright and colorful. And the sun I usually put at a very hopeful angle, so that everything is kind of like radiant, and golden. It's just, I don't know, I think it fits that story better than if I were to make it like super gritty and nasty and gnarly.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think it's really easy not to pay that much attention to, and not just I think from a storytelling angle, but I think of myself as a just pen and ink artist first, and I've kind of ended up doing the colors because I found I couldn't really. I mean, I don't want to pay for somebody else to do it because I'm starting out here, but I also kind of found I couldn't bring myself to hand it over. I just need to control it. But I also found myself really, I would say, kind of struggling from scene to scene to reinvent the wheel instead of maybe sitting down at the beginning of the process and saying, okay, I really need to think through a system that's going to work here, not necessarily just for the artistic side of things, although that's really got to play into it, but just from like, I've got to get this figured out beforehand. So I'm not every scene trying to figure out, okay, what kind of colors am I using here? How do I render this type of thing, render that type of thing? And I think that while it sounds like it's just a way to save time, which it certainly is, I think it really just gives you a consistent experience tonally when you're reading the book. It needs to kind of feel all the same.
Yeah,
And,
I hear that. I absolutely hear that. I mean, even if the colors are wildly different from scene to scene, as long as like the approach to the coloring is in the same, wheelhouse, I think it works. Yeah, but I mean, I think, really been more driven by, what are the available like lights within each scene, sort of work with that and kind of tell myself, okay, well, if I know this is a nighttime scene, I know a lot of the lighting that I'm going to be able to draw from is going to be very cold. And then using my, understanding of how to utilize cold language in order to, work with me. And if I need it to be warm, then I can figure out ways of doing that. But yeah, it's, sorry, my cat is just like,
okay, yeah, I was wondering. It's fine. I just I was worried it was me, and I'm like, what in God's name could that be?
My cat's just. I was trying to keep the door like closed, but she will not. Anyway, sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, man. I keep mine out, but they start clawing and whining at me at about the hour mark. So from time to time, I've let them in,
Yeah,
and they do not quietly behave.
yeah, I hear that. She's just curious, as they all
It
are.
happens. Yeah, they certainly are. What was I going to say? Oh, so yeah, I was going to say about your coloring approach. That was actually something I had in my notes. Your style is, I would say, almost deceptively simple in that it's kind of Ryan Otley. Not I don't think it really goes in like the Bruce Timm level of simplicity or the people that do his style. But when I look at your colors, especially, you're like very cinematic and kind of every panel is different in terms of like you're really just thinking about what the local lighting situation would be and bringing that in there. It's not something where you're and actually something I'm trying to do is take the same exact approach every time unless I have a good reason to change it. You're really kind of going in like an Alex Ross direction on your lighting and just really thinking each panel through in a very realistic way, and like where's my light source, where's my secondary light source, and all that stuff. Which I think is just such an awesome balance, dude, with your ink work, which is really strong, and then a very, I think, more realistic approach to all your lighting.
Thank you. No, God, I really appreciate that. It's Ryan Otley is like one of the top names that I get compared to most when it just comes to the approach that I have. Because I like to say that I approach my work in a way where I'm trying to be as effective as I possibly can with like some of the like least amount of stuff, So like I try not to overload the drawing with a ton of line work. I keep it rather simple most of the time. I mean, if I feel like it's necessary, then I'll load it up a little bit more. And actually, I think with Confederate Monster, I've been kind of working on that a little, trying to just add a little more here and there. But even with the coloring, I try not to. I could go in there and just really render the heck out of it, but I'll think like my angular, simplistic drawing style kind of begs a little bit more of the same in the approach to coloring. So the coloring is also quite animated, inspired, kind of cell shaded in a way. Like I've got a main light source, but then I've also got maybe a secondary light source, just to kind of give me some drama. And I'm glad that you picked up on just like the whole approach of it trying to look more cinematic, because that was my approach when I was writing this treatment. Like I really just felt like the whole thing is kind of more akin to like a Hammer film or, something in
Mhm.
that vein, and that's why I think a lot of the way I approach things, albeit more, maybe a little more simple, I'm really trying to capture the mood of what's in that scene, what's in that panel.
No, I think that's something people lose track of a little bit. I know Ryan Otley had actually he's been really active the last week or two on Twitter,
Mhm.
kind of getting into the weeds on answering some people's questions on like why aren't there long runs like Invincible anymore? And he said, well, it's like, really hard to do.
Yeah.
You can really only do it when you're young, from his saying, and then also he says like I remember the thing that stuck with me is he said it's really hard to find a style that looks really good, but that you could just turn out a book monthly. I mean, that's a tough thing to do in and of itself. But I think something that came out of that, and I think God, what's Cliff Rathburn, the guy that does the colors for that? I'm not sure. Um,
I do not know.
yeah, but I mean, I think they came up with a language in Invincible that was really cool. And I think the other thing, I know probably a lot of that was driven by just the logistics of how do I get this done and make it look cool in a month so the book could just come out, on schedule,
Right.
or sometimes I think faster than that. I think they were doing it pretty quickly. But and the other thing is, I've noticed this lately and looking at a lot of Golden Age comics is it was really cool and appealing to just leave as much space on the page open for color as you could.
Yeah.
I think that plays into just what's cool about comic books, that not necessarily just superheroes, but like I was looking at some old Alex Toth comics too, where these are from the '60s. They weren't Golden Age, but they were the Hot Wheels comics he did,
Mm.
and you could just kind of see there was something about what's appealing about a toy, which is just the bright colors, the space, the kind of design of them, just the graphics on them. That comic really seemed to dial into. He made the cars just really colorful, bold, and the characters as well. And I thought this is really what, as a kid, you look at something, whether it's a toy or a comic, and you're just into it. You're just like, damn, I like that. And I think that's something that when you do, you really take care to balance out your line work and your color and like figure out, hey, like, especially like say this face here on the right, you made like, I think just perfect decisions on what do I want to describe with color and what do I want to describe with line work and darks.
Yeah.
So I think that's just, I think that sort of thoughtfulness just produces such a good final product.
Right. Well, and a lot of it too is just the synergy between, what looks good versus how fast can you do it,
Yeah.
because I found that in the beginning when I was just starting to do work for other clients versus just doing it for myself. Because, when I'm doing it for myself, I have a little bit more leeway. But when I'm doing it for a client, not only am I doing it on their schedule, because some of them have deadlines,
Hmm.
but I'm also under the gun with trying to keep the cash flow going as well. So like I got to be able to get a whole project done in a month so that I can open myself up for another project,
Yeah.
instead of taking my time. And so especially for the indie stuff, because a lot of the indie guys, their budgets are a little lower than say somebody that's a little bit more well known or has a little bit more money to throw around at stuff. So you kind of have to meet them where they are at certain situations. So when it came to myself trying to figure out like, okay, what do I need to do in order to be able to make this go faster? And a lot of it is just looking at like you were saying, looking at the panels and seeing where's my opportunities to make this up with coloring, because I can splash some color on this and throw a sky in there really quickly,
Yeah.
versus trying to noodle out something. Like I can just draw and draw and draw clouds all day long, or I can draw and draw and draw like trees or whatever, but like I can
Hmm.
paint that stuff in really quickly. So like making decisions like that that are economical, that save you time in the long run for all the stages of the process, not just drawing but coloring and everything else. um, I think that is as much as an important skill in this trade as anything else. Above, like I would say, even in ways like above, like being able to like be like the best at drawing. Like I think that if you know more about how to crank something out quickly and
Hmm.
do it well, it may not be like Ryan Otley, but at least like you can do it. And I think that's what most clients are looking for is like speed a lot nowadays
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah, I mean, and I can tell that is in your mind because I've seen your work on so many other books out there aside from just yours. And I found, dude, when I've kind of taken that approach where I'm like, dude, I could have this part of the panel be this thing here that's easy to do and quick.
yep.
More than half the time, at the end, I'm like, that just looks way better than if I had done it the harder way. And I
Yeah.
think that comes from it just being bolder and more punchy because each drawing is not its own thing. It's got to live on the page with other stuff. And then also like I think it just feels more like a comic book because you look at the stuff we grew up reading. Those guys were not screwing around with deadlines like people do today. Sometimes they were just like, all right, this is my job. I got to get this done to get another one. Kind of like what you're describing. So they would take those shortcuts, which I think kind of created the language we're used to seeing visually with comics, and it just feels right
Yeah.
most of the time that you see that.
Yeah. Well, and you figure out your own way of doing it. Everybody's got, I think, their own way of cutting the corner here and there.
Hmm.
But I think again, doing it like you're saying in conjunction with like proper like compositional technique and rendering technique and like one of the little tricks because I also teach drawing and concept art, and one of the
Oh,
things
cool.
I really harp on is creating depth with different layers of atmospheric perspective. So you have like stuff that's really close to camera, it's almost completely in shadow, and then and that's the foreground. You have stuff in the middle ground that's more your main kind of elements, your main characters, things like that, and then you have the background behind that, so like this set behind your main kind of scene. And so I really think about that with almost every illustration that I'm doing, so that I can add just a little extra depth to everything, so everything doesn't look so flat, because my work does have it does tread the line, I think, sometimes between being um, fully descriptive of the shape and becoming
Hmm.
flat in certain areas, um, just because of the simplistic approach to it. So I think by doing that, by like really pushing the depth with a lot of things, I think I hopefully make up.
Yeah, no, I mean it really pops, and like I kind of like what I was saying before. Most of the time, the things like that are you think of it as cutting a corner, but it's really just enhancing your planes of distance and stuff like that. It really ties into the more fundamental thing we ought to be thinking of. And if you grew up when I grew up in the '90s, I thought you were a better artist the more lines were on the page, and that
Right.
undermines that completely. And I still have it in my blood a little bit, but it's something that I've kind of learned. The less I concentrate in that, the more I concentrate on like, hey, this thing's got to be solid and up here, and this thing's got to be a little lighter and back there. It
Right.
just makes the page stronger and ends up telling the story a lot better. So
Well,
my oh, go ahead, man.
I was gonna say, I like going back to the old adage from Einstein, like if you can't explain it simply enough, then you don't
Hmm.
understand it.
Yeah.
So like if I feel like if I can't explain my drawing in a simple format, then I don't quite understand like what I'm doing. Because I do feel like there are a lot of artists out there that they rely on a ton of line work in order for their stuff to pop.
Hmm.
If you stripped away a lot of that stuff, would it still pop? So I don't know, but that's at least my approach. Simple is better.
Yeah, I mean that's something I've been when I have been doing stuff that's more detailed. I've been really selective on like what part of a surface I'm doing it with because I do want that detail and that the texture it gives you. But I'm like, especially with color and stuff on computers where you have just so many options to make things pop there.
But
I think leaving it open for color just makes it look so much better in the end. So the last thing I was going to ask you is you're doing your comic, you're doing I've seen your work on tons of other comics, and you teach and you have another job as well. How many pages do you turn out a week on average?
well, I've tracked it right now to be about 2 pages a day, and that's including like coloring. So drawing and coloring 2 pages a day is usually my average per week, and I am working. Um, well, I'm working 5 days a week now because the sixth day is my Confederate Monster Day. So I am still technically working 6 days, but that last day I'm working just for myself. So yeah, I'm able to crank out, about 10 pages a week ish. And it also depends on obviously the complexity, right? So like, when I do a story that's largely talking heads with maybe a little bit of action, then I can crank through that pretty quick. But if it's something where, there's a ton of building skyscraper scenes, like downtown scenes in New York or whatever, or there's like like in Confederate Monster where there's battle scenes,
Mhm.
there's all kinds of little people, then yeah, those take me a little longer. But most average, I would say, I can crank out comfortably a 24-page book in a month, no problem.
Dude, I'm insanely jealous. I'm tempted just to kick you off of the show right now. That is great. But I mean, and I think I think everybody's heard the story about like the photography class in the college where they said they gave half the students say like, hey, just come back with one amazing photo at the end of the semester, and the other ones said, hey, I want to see 100 photos.
Right.
The people that did the 100 photos just
For
way
sure.
better than the people. And I found that to be the case when I'm in a groove and just churning out pages really fast. Although never have I been on the pace that you're describing and turning out stuff of this quality. The quality has been better, even though there's less time per page spent on it because you're just in that groove. Well, dude, that is inspiring, man. That's awesome.
Thank you. But it's taken many years to get there.
Yeah, that does.
I started out about 10 years ago.
Okay.
I started out the old traditional way where I was doing all my thumbnails on a piece of, computer paper and doing them all this big. And then I'd blow up the thumbnail to, the size of my drawing paper, the 11 by 17 or whatever. And I built myself a light table. So I would, trace over the thumbnail and do my pencils and then do my inks. And then I would, at the time I was doing like a watercolor wash, very similar to how Francis Manifold did his run Flash, and a lot of his illustration. So I used to do a wash and then I would bring it in Photoshop and do the coloring in Photoshop. And when I did it that way, oh man, it was a grudge. Lots more time to do it that way. But I made the switch to digital, I want to say about 5 years ago. And that's been speeding things up beyond belief. You get not only, I think, speed out of it, but you get a better quality product out of it because you have the ability to very quickly undo, try it again, undo, try it again. And I know that in ways like some purists might look at that and be like, oh, well, you're not capturing like the nuance of like not being able to go over it again, that kind of thing. But I don't know, like I feel like I've learned a lot more about my approach to drawing by being able to do that, undoing things quickly and trying them again and just seeing the difference between what I don't like about certain lines and what I do like about other lines. Because like one of the things I've noticed, especially with my coloring, is to make it look more realistic and interesting, I vary the thickness a lot. So like if I'm catching an edge at the top of something, I want to thicken that up. And then as I'm drawing it down, like it thins out a little bit and then it thickens up again. So like that constant sort of change of thick to thin lines always will give you more visual interest, I think, in art. So yeah, I'm not sure where I was going with that.
No, I mean, I get it. I get pretty into the weeds and art stuff too. So I'm with you there.
What was I talking about?
Yeah, but no, I think that's the digital thing. That's something I think people lose a little bit is that, yeah, you don't have this great physical product at the end. And yes, you're not getting maybe some of the grit that you get in an ink drawing or something like that, which I guess I can agree with. I mean, it's not crazy, but the fact that you basically are in a situation where you can try something 5 times and do the best thing. Not only are you getting that better thing because you can just undo it and you don't have to lose the whole page when you do that or white it out. Right. You're also learning what the best thing is, carrying that to the next piece. And that happens over and over again. And just exponentially, I see you learn, so much more that way.
Right. I've been even sort of toying around with the idea of in issue 6 of Confederate Monster doing a couple of traditional pages, or at least traditionally inked pages. So like, do all the pencils digitally, but then print them out and, have a couple that are original pages that would be the pages I put into the book, so that, like that's the original that was printed in the book, versus trying to do a digital version and then using that instead. But I was thinking about doing that because, I think some of us digital artists, regrettably in ways sort of do leave a little bit of money on the table. A lot of
Yeah.
the guys who do traditional work, they can sell that work and make extra money that way. But I was toying around with the idea of doing a couple traditional pages just to see what I could do for the last, Kickstarter for this, because I think it would be kind of a fun, whale reward.
Yeah, I'm doing the same thing actually, and that'll lead us. Excuse me. That'll lead us right into the second part of our conversation, a little bit about the marketing and stuff like that. But I want to play a couple commercials here from some of our partners. So let me do that, and we'll get right back into this.
Sounds good.
Click that mouse and warp into All Ages of Geek's website, your ultimate portal to everything geek culture. Here you'll find articles that speak your language, from the latest anime buzz to the coolest tech trends. Our mission? To celebrate geekdom in all its glory. Whether you're a gamer, a comic enthusiast, a 90s kid, or an anime aficionado, we've got something for you. Dive deep into them with All Ages of Geek.
Your comics take a lot of time and effort to create. Way too much to have them get damaged while shipping to your backers. Gemini Comic Supply mailers keep your comics safe in transit, and with the code GeekCollective10, you can get those mailers with 10% off your order. That's GeekCollective10. Enter it at checkout to get 10% off.
Yeah, so definitely check out All Ages of Geek if you're into some of that stuff. They've got so much cool stuff to check out over there. And on the Gemini mailers, I just saved a bunch of money ordering stuff for Fulfilling Cobalt Crisis. So if you've got hundreds of comics you got to send out, you definitely don't want those getting bent up in the mail. So head over there and enter that code to save a little bit of money doing it. Dave, you were just saying that you were I'm actually going through the exact same thing where I just bought a light table a little bit ago. So, because I want to start doing at least like my covers and maybe some splash pages as physical things, partly just to have them and partly because I could sell a few of them. Because yeah, I've seen people really kind of run up the totals in their Kickstarters or crowdfunding. I think especially Nick Pitara's book was, I want to call it, I forget what it was, some kind of barbarian character with a missing jaw or a missing nose or something like that. It looked really cool. But I think he sold like half the pages. And that campaign was, I want to say 6 figures or something close to it. Wow. So I'm definitely got my attention. It's made me think I have to really get back into producing more physical art. But I found it really tough the first few ones to like remember how to make certain ink strokes and just do things cleanly. I also didn't realize I had, in the last 20 years, my eyesight's degraded a little bit. So I the first time I was sitting down to do it, I'm like, maybe I need a magnifying glass or something. It took me a while to figure out, like, oh yeah, you're 45. You don't see that well anymore.
Right. No, I feel that. Yeah, I've done a couple of traditional commissions lately, and yeah, there's definitely a lot of remembering how to approach certain materials, and just the overall kind of like low grade fear that you have that like you're gonna make the wrong mark or that you could spill your ink or whatever, so yeah, there's a little bit of that, but there is, I think, a sense of extra sort of pride when you're finished with it though, because you have physical to like kind of look at. Because I did do a draw stream a couple years ago where we were doing pieces, each, I think it was Monday or Tuesday or something, and you came away with like a finished original, and largely I would blow through mine pretty quickly, so I would go back and do a bunch of colored pencil over top while we were finishing the live stream, and it was just fun to kind of again play around with traditional media, see what kind of effect you can create now that you have a little bit more knowledge of what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I had to rediscover that inking was, and I was never that good at inking. I've never had the steadiest hand. So like in college, I would try and do some physical. I mean, I did physical everything, painting, and I was fine at that. And figure drawing, which I've kind of always continued to do, but that's just so sketchy and different. You're never looking for that like really almost perfect line. And in college, I kind of would, my stuff, I'd sort of ink it like John Paul Leon did back at EarthX, where it was just a little sketchy. I was like, all right, I can kind of get away with that. But I knew I wasn't quite doing it right. And I wasn't doing like what I wanted to do, which was kind of cleaner Steve Rude type stuff. and I kind of had to relearn a lot of that. It's like I was like painting our house. We have an old house and we've been repainting it, and there are times where I would just line up at a certain angle to just get this one surface that was the weird thing, and I was like, that's actually more what inking is like. You're not. I always kind of would be trying to draw while I'm doing it and end up with something that just didn't look right or look too sketchy. And it still does sometimes. But I think people underestimate what an important separate skill inking is than just drawing and describing a surface, but just really making it look perfect and ready for final art.
Oh yeah, it is kind of interesting to me, because I have had a lot of practice doing all the different steps, between penciling and inking and coloring. That I feel very confident in my ability and my approach to all three. But it is kind of interesting that there are artists out there that really struggle with one or two of those three things, like I see pencilers who are only pencilers. They don't really do inking very well, or they don't do coloring well. Or I see those who do coloring well, but don't do drawing well, those who draw well, but don't do coloring well. So yeah, it is kind of interesting to see the variety of ways in which everybody kind of approaches their stuff, because even inkers, sometimes inkers aren't very good at just drawing, but they're really good at inking. So honestly, I've never really worked with an inker before, so I'd be kind of curious to see what an inker would do with my stuff.
I have a few times, and I've generally been like a little too like, oh, that's not what I was saying.
Maybe.
It depends, I think, on the situation. And but actually, I never checked out. Most of Jim Lee's stuff is drawn by him, inked by Scott Williams, colored by Alex Sinclair. Obviously, looks great. And we're kind of all used to how it looks.
Right.
It's been really cool seeing each of their social medias, and you can see Jim Lee ink stuff on his own. You can see Scott Williams now drawing a few covers on his own without Jim Lee's pencils. And then you can also see Alex Sinclair coloring other people's work. But I think he also draws some stuff himself if you look at his Instagram. That's such a good way to highlight what I think those guys are probably the top of the line, like currently in a lot of ways. It's been so interesting to see in ways that I think comic fans from other eras really couldn't. Each of those guys doing their stuff together and separately. And you can just really see like what Scott Williams brings to Jim Lee's stuff. When you compare, each thing, it's cool to see those jobs.
Right.
But since we're coming up on an hour here, you mentioned that you were kind of doing some original art. Are you doing original art that people can get as part of this campaign?
Not for this campaign. I guess I hadn't really thought about it up until like literally 10 minutes ago. So maybe I will, to be honest with you. I mean, there's no reason why I couldn't. It would have to be a page that I'm pretty close to like ready to go with. I could potentially do. I'd have to look at the schedule, my lineup of pages. But no, yeah, because I did get a review of the campaign, and they did say that one of the things I was missing was like a bigger, like what they call like a whale tier, something that's a little more, expensive. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe we got plenty more days left in the campaign. I could switch it up and throw that in there. I definitely want to do it for sure for the next one, and I might probably even do a few pages, like a half a dozen or something like that, since it is a longer issue, and just really pick and choose my pages wisely, make sure that they're the ones that are like really interesting and robust and, that kind of thing. Because we got a lot of really cool opportunities for interesting scenes and, cinematic kind of quality stuff. So 2-page spreads and stuff, So, but yeah, I got commissions. So I got a tiny commission and I've got a mini portrait. So the tiny commission is about the size of a trading card. I was actually going to do a couple of those earlier today. I didn't get around to it. But the like I said, the tiny commission is like a headshot. So any character that you want, I'll do like one color along with the ink. And then the mini portrait is just a black and white 5x7. Any character that you want. I embellish a little bit of the background to kind of match the character a little bit, if I can. But yeah, they are both original drawings by me. And like I said, you can get any character that you want. It'll be part of the campaign survey when we're all done.
Very cool. And then you also are offering a lot of your older comics as well, I think I saw.
Yeah, I get a library of some of the work that I've done in the past. So I did a book with Morgan Weed called Bloodsmith. That one's another horror sort of genre with an interesting kind of twist to it. Like the main character, they call him the Bloodsmith. He basically has this like mystical power over his own blood, so he can like use it as weaponry, or like he can solidify it with his will.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. And so that's a very cool series. We've only done 2 issues of it. There's a 3rd issue that's supposed to be in production hopefully later this year, is what they're telling me. So I got 1 more to go there. But then Vampire Detective in Space is a pretty well-known series by Caleb Palmquist and myself. There were 4 issues of the original arc that are out. We got 2 available here, issues 1 and 2, for through this campaign. And then Caleb and I are actually working on another installment of this series that's going to be a noir story. Very bit of a departure from the original book, but it's very cool, very interesting twist. If you love noir, you're going to love it because it's a very noir-esque story. Caleb did a really good job with the script. And that Kickstarter for that book just wrapped a couple weeks ago. So we are going to be starting production on that pretty soon.
Cool.
And then I've got a copy of Feast or Famine, which is another one of my books that I wrote and colored, but I had another illustrator, Joseph Cooper, illustrated it for me. That was published by Alternate Comics a couple of years ago. And that's just a collected edition of all 3. I have quite a bit of the trade collections left, and I want to make sure I can try to keep moving those. And then the last thing I got there is a copy of Undercity Tales issue 2, the one that I illustrated with Scott Wilkie from Bad Bug, excuse me. And it's a very cool, self-contained sort of love romance story with this like mob kind of element to it. So very cool. I think it's like, I want to say it's like 32 pages, so it's a little longer than most. But that was a really fun book to work on. Had a lot of really cool visuals in it, like a car chase and mob beatdowns and stuff. So yeah,
very cool. And there's some pretty cool stretch goals too. If you can hit those, I think everybody would love to see some of this stuff. I think a radio show edition is just, that just seems to fit so perfectly. I've been listening to a bunch of old Shadow episodes, and I mean stories like this would just lend themselves to that format. So
I really, really want to do it. I mean, I know it would like take a lot of extra time, but like when I made the trailer for the Kickstarter, and it's the original trailer, I kind of just been repurposing it for right now. But I had a very cinematic kind of quality going on in my mind about how I wanted to do it. So that's why it starts off a little eerie and slow, and then the action kind of ramps up from there. But no, I had the idea of doing, a like old radio show-esque, version of it, because I thought it would be fun for people to like listen to it while they're actually like flipping through the pages of the book. And kind of create more of an interactive experience that way. And, the first stretch goal there, the 4-song soundtrack, that was something that I got made for the original campaign that I did for issues 1 through 3 a couple years back. And so I actually commissioned a friend of mine who I went to high school with. He and I were in a band together, and he wound up going more of the musician route, and I went more of the artist route. And so, he's got all the equipment to produce some really great music. So we sat together one weekend, and we just sort of went through my ideas, and we wound up coming up with 4 tracks that we felt like worked really well to just sort of put on in the background as you're, reading the book. So yeah, it would be fun to be able to kind of marry those ideas together, take like original music and like put it into the radio show and make sound effects and do all the voices and stuff. I think that would be so cool.
No, it sounds awesome, man. Well, so just to wrap up, since we're coming up on an hour, I mean, the book is doing really well. It's almost certainly going to meet its goal pretty soon. So hopefully there's a pretty good shot at seeing some of those awesome stretch goals, Matt, which I think would be all of those sound just awesome. And yeah, I guess to wrap up, anything else you want to tell us about the story or the campaign?
Just that, like I said at the beginning, we're rounding the last issue, or rounding into the last issue here pretty soon. So, I think that it would be the best time to start getting in on the series now, so that when that last issue hits, you're ready to go. It's definitely, I think, more of a unique approach to a Frankenstein story. One of the things that I did find when I was researching this one is there's a lot of Frankenstein properties out there, but they're all largely very similar in their story structure and the way that they approach the retelling of Frankenstein. And so for me, like when I started this book, I wanted to write it in such a way where there are Frankenstein elements to it, but it doesn't feel like this is a, shot for shot remake, of the original. Like I love Guillermo del Toro, but like the upcoming Frankenstein he's got, I'm just feeling like it's going to be another remake of the original, which by all means I'm up for it. Like I think it would be great, but the difference I think with Confederate Monster here is that I'm exploring something that's completely apart from the original story, but it still maintains it as part of its foundation, if that makes sense. So, and I think in that way, it lends itself to a broader approach to telling these sort of traditional or classic monster stories, but in different, unique ways. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely the way I approach my book, which actually you've kind of given me the perfect segue to our comic roundup here. I never like to miss a chance to play any of my dumb little cartoons here. But
I love it. It's great.
To go what you're saying, this guy in We Are Scarlet Twilight is Captain Lancet, but is also like kind of Dracula, which is a little bit of a spoiler if you haven't read the first one. But we're going to be launching this pretty soon, hopefully this month. I want to get the first issue done. This is going to cover issues 1 and 2. I wasn't sure I was going to do a sequel to this book because I really liked how it ended. But then I kind of got the idea of doing something like Secret Wars or Crisis on Infinite Earths, but if it had been done in the 1940s during the Golden Age of comics. So you get all the atmosphere, the pulps, the Shadow, the Batman animated series with the kind of world-shattering, continuity-changing stuff that happens in your big 2 crossover. So I think it's going to be really fun. And the link for this and the other books I'm going to show are also down in the description. So if you're not on the pre-launch for this, click over there and get on that so you'll know when we launch. And that should be hopefully, I want to say early April, I'm thinking. I also want to share our, which I think you can, I'm not sure if you can still back this. We'll go through it though, if you can. Joey Galvez, who usually co-hosts, is put this together with some of our stuff from Archetypes, which is our kind of homage to Wizard magazine, but if it had, focused on indie comics in the current day. This takes some artwork from that and puts it together in a really cool set that is just a really fun thing. So if you can still back that, I'm not sure if he closed it down or not, but if you can, head over there and check that out. It's really cool. The other one I want to bring up is Remember Part 2, Don't Ever Forget. This is a really cool book. It's kind of in the vein of True Detective or some of your more intense, like, I guess, generation-spanning mystery sort of revenge thrillers. I read this one when I was putting together my cover for it, which you can get here. It's a super intense book. I really, it's one of those things where, there's some mystery stuff going on that's fun to kind of figure out, and you like kind of getting the resolutions from that. But I think this thing that stuck out with me on this one, it was like such an intense book. you almost feel like you're in the room when some of these horrible or crazy things are happening. And it's a really cool, I would say, very visceral experience for a comic. So if you're into some of that stuff, or if you want to check out my cover, which was a blast to do, head over to this link and you can support this one. I think it has 7 days, if I'm not, 7 days left. So definitely check that one out. I think that's all we have to share for this week. So that'll do it for us. Dave, I want to thank you again for coming on and promoting the book. I think everybody's going to love it. It looks awesome. Where can people find you to follow this project and other ones?
Sure. So people can find me. My handle is Dave Swartz Art. So on Facebook, Instagram, X, I'm on Threads now. And if you want to find my website, you can just type in daveswartzart.com. That'll take you to my website. You can see a lot of my illustration gallery there. I'm also an abstract painter, if you could kind of see behind me. So on the website, I have all kinds of different crazy paintings. And so, it's just daveswartzart.com. Cool.
Well, thank you again for coming back to the show and showing us this great book. It's awesome to see that it's doing well and about to hit its goal, and can't wait to see what the end of the story is.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really great being with you today.
Awesome. All right. Well, that'll do it for this week. I hope everybody watching this has had as much fun talking with Dave or watching this as I've had talking with Dave and checking out the book. So we will see you next week.